My heart pounded, for I had never seen a ghost before, and I frankly never wanted to see one again. But what choice did I have? It was my own flesh and blood in danger, so I dashed back to the dining hall and up to my sister, who lay near the foot of the table, close to the hallway entrance, where the horrible apparition floated about. It was bending down with its ghostly hands stretched out, ready to strangle Susanna. My sister's complexion was as white as the ghost itself, and she screamed, "Help me, Mattie!" I couldn't bear the thought of life without my sister, and I shouted at that pale spectre, "Leave her alone. Take me instead, if you need in a soul to take to the spirit world." "Come on, Susanna, lift yourself off that floor and run!" "But Mattie, I'm stuck," she grimaced. I glanced down at her right foot, ensnared by a crack in the rotten floorboards. With a desperate yank, I freed her just as the ivory spectre's long arms and bony hands turned towards me. Its icy fingers wrapped around my neck, and I struggled for breath, fearing the worst. The spectre resembled a furious woman with long flowing hair and a fiercely angry face, her whole body as pale as a cloud. I could see right through her belly into the long, dark hallway behind her. Despair overwhelmed me until my sister gripped my hand and pulled me away from the ghost. "Mattie, we need to get going now," she urged desperately as she seized my arm and snapped me out of my fright. If she hadn't pulled me away, I might have joined that ghost in the spirit realm and never escaped that haunted castle by the sea. We raced through the dining area into the great hall and up to the window we had entered. I climbed out the window and she followed behind me. When the two of us landed safely, we dashed down the path that had led up to the castle and finally down the trail on the side of the cliff until I collapsed in the sands of the shore and Susanna came crashing in after me. For a few moments we breathed heavily until I could speak. I heaved one last time before uttering, "You reckon we're safe now?" Susanna continued gasping for a few more moments before she composed herself and turned to stare at the castle, now far away on the distant end of the high cliff that jutted out into the ocean. "Mattie, I do not know about these things, but I believe she was just guarding her territory the way a mother dog protects her pups." I answered her. "Sailors used to say they saw ghosts out at sea, but they only guarded spots they had particular interests in. Sister, that was frightening." Susanna was quiet and mumbled a prayer in silence before she spoke. "Mattie, I suppose that ghost just wanted to be alone in her sorrow. How sad to spend eternity not having peace, and two little mites coming in and disturbing you. Mattie, we should never go back to that house. Mom once told me never to bother the dead. It'll bring a curse upon you." I replied, "Do not worry, sis. I never want to see a sight like that again. I'm so hungry, sister. We haven't eaten since yesterday." Susanna grew silent, but I could tell thoughts were swimming around her head like flying fish ready to leap into the air. "Brother, yesterday." She lay back on the sand and looked up into the cloudless sky. "Mattie, we don't have a home now and no one to look after us." I questioned, "What we gonna do, sis? What we gonna do?" I always looked to Susanna for guidance. She was the closest thing to a mum or paw I ever had, and her silence left me feeling lost. Then she spoke. "I guess we just have to walk about this shore and hope we meet someone to help us," I reasoned. "And if no one lives here, Susanna, brother, I ain't going to worry no more. And you know why? Why, sister?" She took a deep breath before sharing her thoughts. "The way I see it, we could have drowned out there in the ocean. Sharks could have eaten us. Boris should have caught us. We should have crashed into those rocks, and the ghost could have taken our souls down to hell. We're fortunate to be among the living. Besides, I've got my little Mattie by my side. If I'm not scared, why should you be?" Then she made up this little ditty. "Mattie, Mattie, oh my dear Mattie, Mattie, do not fear. We braved the sharks and sea, and now we are free, free." She dashed into the ocean and splashed the water. "Sister, the buck are gonna get you!" "Oh, Mattie, silly boy. Buckers are just nonsense tales sailors share to make interesting stories, and mums tell to keep their children safe from drowning." As I was chasing her down the shore, I spied a house in the distance, way up on a cliff that reached out far into the sea. High golden cliffs sparkling in the late afternoon sun surrounded us on three sides, and a dark blue, deep inlet lay before us. On our right was the castle, but far on our left, way up on the cliff that enclosed that side of the harbour, was a large stone house, not as massive as the castle, but impressive in its substance. "Look, Susanna!" I shouted at her as she continued splashing in the waters as she gleefully ran down the shore. She paused and looked upward to where I pointed. "Mattie, let us see who lives there. Maybe they'll help us." I was near starving to death and yelled back, "Wait up, sister. I hope you're right. Maybe they can feed us. I just don't want to see no more ghosts." Susanna stopped racing down through the water and walked back to the beach where she grabbed my hand. We walked for nearly an hour before we came to the high cliff and found a trail heading through bushes to the top of the cliff, where we found a small road that twisted through the thick shrubs until we were directly in front of the ancient stone manor. "I hope there isn't a ghost dwelling here," I nervously told Susanna. Susanna laughed, but I could tell she was just as nervous as I was. "We have no choice," she said. "We do need something to eat. We need someone to take care of us." Once again, she crawled on my shoulder and banged the knocker against a massive wooden door that arched nearly 10 feet upward. There was no porch, just two large windows on either side of the stone slab we stood upon. I saw a candle burning through the window on the left. Susanna jumped off me when we heard a slow creaking noise emitted from the opening of the massive door. A slit of darkness greeted us, and then a rather frightening creature peeked its head out the door. It was a short, thin, hunchback man, bald, with two black eyes, pale skin, elfin ears, a pointed nose shaped like a fishhook, and a timid grin with mostly black teeth. He dressed in a warm magenta tuxedo. "Hello, hello," he said in a very high-pitched voice. "What can I do for you two little children?" Susanna blurted out, "We're lost! Our ship crashed and we're hungry." His shy, screechy voice continued, "Well, I suppose I could serve you some food, but you must be quiet. Shh, follow me." We followed him through the dark greeting room and into a large, shadowy parlour. I'd never been in anyone else's house, except for the castle and our island cottage. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw various items around us. A worn green sofa, several dusty windows, a small candle stand with a burning candle by a window, several wooden chairs, a flame burning inside a brick fireplace, a nearly empty bookshelf, and a painting resting above the fireplace of fishing boats at sea. But mostly, the room was empty. The man led us to a kitchen area and warned us again, "Shh, you don't want to wake the sleeper." "The sleeper?" Susanna questioned. "Shh, quiet," he said in a low voice, looking at us with those piercing black eyes. "Keep your voices down." He led us to a dim little kitchen and pointed to 4 wooden chairs around a small, round wooden table. He stretched up to the cabinet and pulled down a loaf of bread. He took several codfish from a stove and slapped them between the bread. "I suppose you can have the sleeper's food. He hasn't eaten in 40 years. I don't suppose today'll be an exception." He took a large butcher knife and banged the sandwich in 2. He gave one half to me and the other to my sister. We had no plates or silverware, so we began chewing on the rather stale bread and nearly raw cod. He didn't say much. He just munched on the sandwiches with difficulty. I noticed most of his mouth was bereft of teeth, and those that remained were quite black. His back curved so much that his face nearly reached the table as he eyed his sandwich intently before nibbling on the bread like a mouse. The sandwiches were awful, and if he hadn't been chewing on the grub himself, I would have supposed he was trying to poison us. But we were desperately hungry, and both Susanna and I commenced eating the sharp-smelling sandwiches. The cod tasted raw, and we constantly had to pull out loose bones from the fish. Susanna struggled mightily to swallow. I snickered as I watched my sister's eyes squint and her nose wrinkle. She coughed and forced herself to swallow each bite. But she would smile in relief when the bite went down, for she did not want to appear ungrateful. The humour I found in my sister's struggles made it easier to swallow each bit of the cold, fishy sandwich. Sister kicked me from under the table and gave me a look of disapproval, and while it stung a bit, I couldn't suppress a chuckle. Suddenly, the whole kitchen began shaking and dishes in the cabinet rattled about. The kitchen table began bouncing up and down and the windows shuddered. At first, I thought it was a foghorn coming from the ocean down below, but then I realized the sound was reverberating from down the hall of that ancient manor, the whole edifice trembling from those sonorous vibrations. The noise grew so intense that Susanna and I covered our ears. I knew it wasn't a foghorn, and after a few grunts and rasps, I recognized it as snoring. Susanna whispered to the strange man in the magenta tuxedo, "Who is snoring so loudly down the hall? Is that the sleeper?" "Shh!" The man who told us to call him Butler whispered urgently. "That is the sleeper. He often snores when he is distressed. Something tragic happened many years ago, and he prefers to sleep now. Please do not wake him. If he wakes in his famished state after sleeping for such a long time, he may become quite angry, and he will definitely be hungry. He might even snack on a few little mites such as yourselves." Susanna persisted. "How long has he been sleeping?" And I added, "I want to see him." Butler's pale face had a look of desperation. "You must never see him. He has been sleeping for 40 years, Butler replied solemnly. "Well, what does he do when he is not sleeping?" I queried. "When he is not sleeping, he is sleeping. That is all he ever does. 40 years ago was a much happier time for him, and that is all I will say about that." Butler placed his head in his hands and began weeping softly. Oh, the poor soul. How happy he once was. "I prefer not to dwell on the sad times," he said, glancing around the lonely, damp house. He rose from the table and led us into the parlor, where a fire was burning vigorously. "Now, children, you may sleep by the fireplace, for it is the warmest place in the house. But remember what I said. Do not be mischievous little children and make noise, for you do not want to wake the sleeper." It was getting dark outside, and he disappeared into the recesses of the house. We stared at the fire for a few minutes and warmed our tired, wet bodies before Susanna sang that little lullaby about angels. I asked her if we were going to be safe. She said, "For now, yes. So don't you worry, Mattie." We continued hearing that snoring echoing through the house like a hurricane. Slowly, we fell asleep. In the morning, Butler came and woke us. He took us to the kitchen, feeding us fish soup with carrots. Once again, the food tasted awful, but I eagerly lapped it up, so hungry I was, and Susanna seemed on the verge of tears, trying as hard as she could to down it. Before I could muster a laugh, she once again kicked me under the table. I whispered to her, "What was that for?" She whispered back, "'Cause I know what you're thinking." She lifted her head and smiled at Butler, still in his magenta tuxedo, but his face was staring deeply into the small wooden bowl. Then, just like a seagull lifting its head to see who might be spying on the fish it's gorging on, he quickly looked us over and then spoke. "You should go out and play, but do not go into the ocean. There are dangerous sea monsters that would love to devour you, and there are also sharks in these waters. Stay on the shore." The next few days were the happiest days of our lives. Susanna and I spent our time on the shore, making sandcastles and telling stories about sea monsters and sailors traveling the oceans of the world. We saw the haunted castle in the distance and contemplated whether we should return there. Our curiosity piqued. But we were content in the warm sun of the calm harbour, hidden from the rest of the world. We eventually grew tired of our routine and wanted to explore further. I ran out into the sea, and Susanna called, "Come back here, Matthew. The sea is dangerous, and the butler said it's full of sharks and sea monsters." I laughed and splashed about. Looking down into the water, I saw an enormous eye staring back at me. I turned and ran back to the shore but fell, feeling the ocean pulling me under.